What if everything you've been taught about wealth and money has been keeping you poor? For decades, maybe your entire life, you've been chasing financial abundance the way the world taught you to chase it. Working harder, saving more, investing smarter, hustling relentlessly. Yet here you are, still struggling with the same money anxieties, still feeling like there's never quite enough, still wondering why prosperity seems to flow so easily to some people while remaining elusive for you. Has this ever happened to you? You get a raise, a bonus, or even a windfall of money, and somehow, within weeks or months, you're back to the same financial stress level you were before. It's as if there's an invisible ceiling limiting your abundance. No matter how hard you try to break through it, what you're about to discover might surprise you, but that invisible ceiling isn't created by the economy, your boss, your education level, or even your circumstances. It's created by something far more fundamental, your spiritual alignment with the true source of all wealth. The shocking truth is that real abundance has nothing to do with material accumulation and everything to do with divine consciousness. While the world teaches us to chase external riches, the bigger paycheck, the better investment portfolio, the next business opportunity, true wealth flows from an entirely different place. It flows from recognizing that God, infinite divine intelligence, is the only genuine source of all good in your life. Think about this for a moment. Everything you've been taught to depend on, your job, your clients, the stock market, even the government, these aren't actually sources of your provision. They're simply channels through which divine abundance flows. And here's the revolutionary part. When you understand this distinction, when you stop confusing the channel with the source, everything changes. Stay with me until the end, because what I'm about to share with you comes from ancient spiritual laws that have been operating since the beginning of time. These aren't New Age fantasies or wishful thinking. These are precise mathematical principles that govern how abundance manifests in the physical world. The same people who discovered these laws went from poverty to prosperity, not by working harder, but by working with spiritual forces most people don't even know exist. You see, what we call scarcity, what we experience as financial struggle, is really just consciousness that has become separated from its divine source. Every form of poverty, whether it's economic, emotional, or spiritual, stems from one fundamental error: forgetting our connection to infinite divine supply. But here's what's truly fascinating. The moment you remember this connection, the moment you realign your consciousness with its true source, abundance doesn't just arrive in your life. It emerges from within you. It's not something you have to chase, manipulate, or force. It becomes as natural as breathing. Right now, as you're reading this, there are spiritual laws of wealth operating in your life, whether you're aware of them or not. These laws are either working for you or against you, depending on your level of spiritual alignment. And the beautiful thing is, once you understand how these laws work, you can begin to consciously cooperate with them instead of unknowingly resisting them. What you're about to learn will challenge everything you think you know about money, success, and prosperity. But more importantly, it will give you the master key to unlock the abundance that has been waiting for you all along. This is exactly why I'm so passionate about sharing these spiritual principles with you. You see, for too long, these ancient laws of wealth have been hidden away, accessible only to a select few who understood their power. But I believe this wisdom belongs to everyone who's ready to receive it. And speaking of receiving, I want to pause here for just a moment, because your energy, your engagement, your very presence here tells me something profound about you. You're not just casually browsing content. You're genuinely seeking transformation. You're ready for something deeper than the surface-level financial advice that floods the internet. If this topic resonates with you, if something in your heart is already stirring as we explore these spiritual laws together, I'd love for you to drop a comment below about what has touched you the most so far. Maybe it's the idea that God is your true source, or perhaps the realization that you've been confusing channels with the source itself. Whatever it is, share it with our community. Because here's what I've discovered after years of creating this content. Your stories, your breakthroughs, your moments of recognition, they don't just inspire me, they inspire everyone who reads them. When you share your experience, you're actually helping someone else who might be struggling with the exact same money fears or spiritual questions that you once had. Your participation here is what helps this channel grow and reach more people with this kind of content. Every like you give sends a signal that this message matters, that these spiritual truths about wealth need to be heard by more souls who are ready for genuine transformation. And when you subscribe, you're not just following a channel, you're joining a community of people who understand that real abundance comes from divine alignment, not material accumulation. This isn't about building numbers or statistics. This is about creating a movement of spiritually awakened individuals who refuse to accept financial limitation as their permanent reality. Every person we reach together is someone who might finally understand why they've been struggling with money despite their best efforts. Now, let me share with you the first of these 7 spiritual laws that can completely revolutionize your relationship with abundance. This law alone has the power to shift your consciousness from scarcity to divine supply, but you have to understand it not just intellectually, but spiritually. The hidden truth that transformed my entire financial reality was this revelation. Abundance is not a divine whim that God randomly bestows upon the lucky few. It's actually a natural law, as precise and predictable as gravity itself. When you align with spiritual principles, prosperity flows to you with the same mathematical certainty that water flows downhill. This completely shattered my old mindset about money and success. For years, I had been operating under the illusion that wealth was somehow scarce, that there wasn't enough to go around, that I had to compete and struggle to get my share. But that's like believing gravity only works for certain people. The law doesn't discriminate. It simply responds to alignment. Think about gravity for a moment. You don't have to beg it to work. You don't have to convince it you're worthy. You don't have to struggle to make it function. It simply operates according to its nature consistently without exception. The same is true for the spiritual laws governing abundance. They're not personal, they're not emotional, they're not playing favorites. They're universal principles that respond to consciousness, period. This transformation in understanding led me to another profound realization about money itself. Money is completely neutral energy. It's neither inherently good nor inherently evil. It's simply a form of spiritual substance that takes on the characteristics of the consciousness from which it's sought. When you pursue money from fear, desperation, or greed, it becomes a source of anxiety and bondage. But when you invoke it from faith, service, and divine alignment, it becomes a tool for blessing and freedom. I remember the exact moment this clicked for me. I was sitting in my car after another frustrating meeting with my financial advisor, feeling that familiar knot of anxiety in my stomach about my retirement savings. That's when it hit me like lightning. I had been making money my God instead of making God my source. I had been giving this neutral energy all the power to determine my peace, my security, my sense of worth. But here's what's truly revolutionary about this understanding. Once you recognize money as neutral spiritual substance, you stop being afraid of it and you stop worshipping it. You begin to see it for what it really is, a reflection of your consciousness, a mirror of your spiritual alignment, a physical manifestation of invisible laws operating in your life. The impact of this shift cannot be overstated. When you stop chasing money as if your survival depends on it, when you stop giving it the power to control your emotions, something miraculous happens behind the scenes of your financial life. The desperate energy that actually repels abundance begins to dissolve, and you start operating from a completely different frequency. This is where most people get stuck in their financial journey. They're trying to apply worldly strategies to spiritual laws, not understanding that the two operate on entirely different principles. They're working harder instead of aligning deeper. They're focusing on the effect instead of the cause. They're attempting to manipulate the channels instead of connecting with the source. Now, I want to go even deeper into this transformation because understanding that abundance is natural law and money is neutral energy is just the beginning. There's a specific way your consciousness must be calibrated to allow these laws to work through you rather than against you. The decisions you make from this new awareness, the daily practices that shift your inner climate, the revelations that come when you stop fighting spiritual principles and start flowing with them. Write in the comments, "I'm ready for this shift," if you're feeling the truth of what we're exploring together. The calibration I'm talking about begins with a fundamental shift in how you view the source of your security. Most people live in constant anxiety because they've placed their trust in external circumstances that are inherently unstable. Your job could disappear tomorrow, the stock market could crash, your biggest client could leave, your health could change. When these external factors become your perceived source of provision, anxiety becomes inevitable because you're essentially building your financial house on quicksand. But here's the revelation that changes everything. When you recognize God as your only true source, that anxiety simply evaporates. Not because you become careless or irresponsible, but because you understand that if one channel closes, the source will open another. If one door shuts, divine intelligence will reveal a path you hadn't even considered. This isn't wishful thinking or naive optimism. This is recognizing the difference between temporary channels and the eternal source that flows through them. I've witnessed this transformation in my own journey countless times. There were moments when everything I was depending on seemed to crumble simultaneously. The consulting contract I thought was secure ended abruptly. The investment I was counting on went sideways. The opportunity that seemed guaranteed fell through. In the old mindset, this would have sent me into panic mode, desperately scrambling to control and fix everything. But from this new understanding, I simply said, "Okay, God, show me the new channel." And here's what happened behind the scenes that most people never understand. Within weeks, opportunities began appearing that were far better than what I had lost. Connections materialized out of nowhere. Ideas downloaded into my consciousness that I never would have considered before. Resources became available that I didn't even know existed. It was as if the universe had been waiting for me to let go of my death grip on those failing channels so it could show me something infinitely better. This leads us to perhaps the most profound truth about financial transformation. Your external world is nothing more than a perfect reflection of your internal world. What appears in your bank account, your career opportunities, your living situation, your relationships with money, these are all manifestations of your inner spiritual alignment. The visible is simply the shadow cast by the invisible. Most people have this backwards. They believe that changing their external circumstances will fix their internal state. They think that getting more money will eliminate their financial anxiety, that finding a better job will give them security, that accumulating more assets will bring them peace. But spiritual law operates in the opposite direction. Your internal consciousness creates your external experience, not the other way around. This is why two people can experience the exact same financial setback and have completely different outcomes. One person spirals into deeper lack because their consciousness is rooted in scarcity and fear. The other person uses the challenge as a catalyst for greater abundance because their consciousness is aligned with divine supply and trust. Same external circumstance, radically different results because the real creative power lies in consciousness, not conditions. The impact of truly grasping this principle cannot be overstated. It means you stop being a victim of your circumstances and start becoming the conscious creator of your experience. It means you stop waiting for the world to change and start changing the inner climate that generates your world. It means you recognize that every financial challenge is actually an invitation to deeper spiritual alignment. Now, I want to explore something even more specific about how this consciousness shift manifests in practical ways, because understanding the principle is one thing, but knowing how to apply it in your daily decisions and thought patterns is where the real transformation happens. Write in the comments, internal creates external, if this connection is becoming clear to you. The practical application of this consciousness shift begins with something so simple yet so profound that most people overlook its transformative power. Every morning, before your mind gets hijacked by the endless stream of daily concerns, you need to establish your spiritual foundation through what I call living contemplation. This isn't about sitting cross-legged chanting mystical phrases. This is about consciously aligning your consciousness with truth before the world tries to convince you otherwise. When you affirm, "All good that comes into my life comes from God," you're not just repeating words, you're making a declaration that rewrites your entire operating system. You're telling your subconscious mind, your nervous system, your very cells that God is the source, not your boss, not the economy, not your investments, not anything external. This daily practice becomes the foundation upon which everything else in your financial life is built. But here's the hidden truth behind why this works so powerfully. Your subconscious mind doesn't distinguish between what's happening in the physical world and what you're consistently affirming in your inner world. When you repeatedly declare divine source as your reality, your subconscious begins to organize your entire life around that truth. It starts filtering information differently, noticing opportunities you would have missed before, guiding you toward decisions that align with abundance rather than scarcity. The transformation really accelerates when you become vigilant about the constant stream of thoughts and words flowing through your consciousness throughout the day. Most people have no idea how often they sabotage their own abundance with casual statements that seem harmless but are actually programming their reality for limitation. Every time you say, "I can't afford it," "money is tight," "I don't have enough," you're giving instructions to the universe about what to create in your experience. The journey toward financial freedom requires a complete renovation of your internal dialogue. Instead of "I can't," you learn to say, "God can." Instead of "I don't have," you affirm, "God has." Instead of "I don't know how," you declare, "God knows." This isn't about denying reality or pretending problems don't exist. This is about recognizing that your current reality was created by yesterday's consciousness, and today's consciousness is creating tomorrow's reality. I remember the revelation that occurred when I first started monitoring my thoughts with this level of awareness. I was shocked to discover how many times per day I was unconsciously affirming lack, limitation, and struggle. It was like discovering that I had been unknowingly programming my GPS to take me to destinations I didn't want to visit. The impact of changing these thought patterns was immediate and undeniable. What happens behind the scenes when you make this shift is fascinating. Your brain literally begins to rewire itself. Neuroscience shows us that repetitive thoughts and affirmations create new neural pathways. When you consistently affirm divine provision instead of human limitation, you're not just changing your mindset, you're physically changing your brain's structure. You're creating new networks that naturally seek abundance rather than default to scarcity. The decisions you make from this transformed consciousness are completely different from the decisions you would make from fear and limitation. When God is your source, you don't make desperate choices. You don't compromise your values for money. You don't take opportunities that feel wrong just because they promise financial gain. Instead, you make choices from peace, from inner knowing, from divine guidance. that always leads to greater good. Now, I want to reveal something even more specific about how this inner transformation manifests in your actual financial circumstances, because there's a particular way these spiritual principles translate into tangible results that most people never discover. Write in the comments, "My consciousness is shifting," if you can feel this internal change beginning to happen. The tangible results I'm talking about begin to manifest through one of the most powerful yet misunderstood spiritual practices: giving thanks in advance for what you haven't yet received physically. This goes against every logical instinct your mind has been trained to follow. The world teaches us to believe first what we can see, then respond with gratitude, but spiritual law operates in reverse. When you give thanks before you see the manifestation, you're declaring to the universe that you already know it's done in the invisible realm. This practice completely transformed my relationship with financial uncertainty. Instead of waiting anxiously for the check to arrive, the opportunity to present itself, or the solution to appear, I began thanking God as if it had already happened. Not because I was trying to convince myself or practice positive thinking, but because I finally understood that in the spiritual dimension, everything we need is already complete. Our role isn't to create it, but to align our consciousness with what already exists in divine mind. The revelation behind this practice is profound. When you live in constant gratitude for what's already provided spiritually, you shift from the frequency of need to the frequency of having. And here's what happens behind the scenes. The universe can only respond to the vibration you're emitting, not the circumstances you're experiencing. If you're vibrating lack and desperation, that's what gets reflected back to you. But when you're vibrating gratitude and completion, abundance begins to reorganize itself around that frequency. This brings us to perhaps the most transformative understanding of how your financial reality gets created. Every condition in your life right now, every number in your bank account, every opportunity or obstacle you're facing is nothing more than the physical manifestation of your dominant mental habits over time. Your sustained thought patterns are literally the blueprint from which your financial experience is constructed. Most people live their entire lives never making this connection. They experience their financial circumstances as something happening to them, rather than something being created by them. They don't realize that their habitual worry about money is actually programming more financial worry into their future. They don't understand that their repetitive thoughts about limitation are the very instructions their subconscious mind is using to create limited experiences. The impact of truly grasping this principle is staggering. It means that your financial transformation doesn't depend on external factors changing. It depends on your internal patterns shifting. Every thought you think repeatedly becomes a mental habit. Every mental habit becomes an emotional pattern. Every emotional pattern becomes a vibrational frequency. And every vibrational frequency attracts experiences that match it perfectly. I discovered this truth through my own journey of financial struggle and breakthrough. For years, I had been unconsciously programming scarcity through my dominant thought patterns. I would wake up thinking about bills that were due. I would go to sleep worrying about whether there would be enough money next month. I would have conversations with friends where we complained about how expensive everything was becoming. These weren't just random thoughts. They were my most consistent mental habits, and they were creating my financial reality with mathematical precision. The transformation began when I realized I could consciously choose my dominant thought patterns instead of letting them run on autopilot. Instead of waking up to financial worry, I began waking up to gratitude for divine provision. Instead of falling asleep to anxiety about tomorrow, I started ending each day with thanksgiving for abundance that was already flowing. Instead of participating in conversations about lack, I began speaking only words that affirmed plenty. This shift didn't happen overnight, but the results began appearing almost immediately. Opportunities started presenting themselves that I had never noticed before. People began offering assistance in ways that felt almost magical. Money started flowing from unexpected directions. It was as if I had been tuned to a radio station of scarcity for years, and suddenly I discovered how to tune into the frequency of abundance. Now I want to share with you the specific way this sustained thought pattern transformation actually works in your nervous system, and why it creates such dramatic changes in your external circumstances. Write in the comments, "I'm changing my patterns," if you're ready to consciously transform your dominant mental habits. The way this transformation works in your nervous system reveals one of the most fascinating aspects of spiritual abundance. When you consistently think abundance from a place of serenity rather than desperation, your entire neurology begins to reorganize itself. Your nervous system literally learns to recognize abundance as your natural state instead of treating scarcity as your default setting. This shift happens at a cellular level, rewiring the very pathways that determine how you perceive and respond to financial opportunities. The hidden truth is that most people sabotage their own abundance not through lack of effort, but through the frantic energy with which they pursue it. They obsess over numbers, constantly calculating and recalculating their bank balances, their debt ratios, their investment returns. This obsessive monitoring actually creates a vibration of anxiety that repels the very prosperity they're trying to attract. It's like trying to fill a bucket while simultaneously punching holes in it. When you learn to align with fullness, infinite provision, and possibility from a place of inner calm, something remarkable happens behind the scenes. Your decision-making process changes completely. Instead of making choices from desperation, you make them from clarity. Instead of grasping at every opportunity out of fear, you wait for the ones that truly resonate with your higher purpose. This shift in your decision-making criteria becomes one of the most powerful magnets for sustainable abundance. The journey taught me that serenity isn't passivity, and abundance consciousness isn't about becoming lazy or unmotivated. It's about operating from a completely different frequency. When you know at a deep level that infinite provision is your birthright, you stop scrambling and start flowing. You stop forcing and start allowing. You stop trying to control every variable and start trusting the intelligence that orchestrates the entire universe. But here's where most people derail their own progress, and it's something I learned the hard way through countless personal revelations. Doubt is perhaps the most destructive force in the manifestation process, because it literally breaks the mold before your desires can take physical form. It's exactly like planting a seed and then digging it up every day to check if it's sprouting. The constant interference prevents the natural process from unfolding. I remember going through a period where I would affirm abundance in the morning, feel good about my spiritual practices, and then spend the afternoon checking my bank account multiple times, worrying about upcoming expenses and calculating whether I had enough to cover everything. This pattern of faith followed by doubt, trust followed by fear, was like stepping on the gas and the brake simultaneously. I was sending mixed signals to the universe and getting mixed results in return. The impact of eliminating this doubt pattern was immediate and profound. When I learned to plant my spiritual seeds of abundance and then leave them alone to grow in the invisible realm, trusting that divine timing was orchestrating everything perfectly, my external circumstances began to shift in ways that seemed almost magical. Opportunities appeared at exactly the right moment. Resources became available just when I needed them. Solutions emerged for problems I hadn't even figured out how to solve yet. The transformation happens when you understand that doubt isn't just a minor hindrance to your abundance. It's an active creative force that manifests more reasons to doubt. Every time you question whether the spiritual laws are working, every time you wonder if you're doing it right, every time you check for evidence that things are changing, you're actually interrupting the very process you're trying to accelerate. Now, I want to explore the specific mechanics of how this faith without doubt operates in the practical world, because there's a particular way that unwavering trust translates into tangible financial breakthroughs that defies conventional logic. Write in the comments, "I trust the process," if you're ready to stop interrupting your own manifestations with doubt. The mechanics of unwavering trust operate through what I call the language of creation. And this is where most people unknowingly sabotage their financial breakthrough without even realizing it. Every word you speak, every complaint you voice, every frustration you express is actually a creative declaration that shapes your reality. When you complain about your financial situation, you're not just venting harmless emotions. You're literally affirming that your problems are more powerful than divine law, that your circumstances are stronger than spiritual principle. The transformation I experienced became accelerated when I realized this hidden truth. Every time I complained about bills being too high, I was declaring that lack had more authority in my life than abundance. Every time I expressed frustration about money being tight, I was essentially programming my subconscious to create more experiences of financial restriction. These weren't just innocent observations about my current reality. They were active instructions to the universe about what to manifest next. This revelation shocked me because I had been unconsciously participating in conversations that were programming scarcity into my future. Family gatherings where everyone complained about rising costs. Coffee meetings with friends where we bonded over financial struggles, social media posts where I vented about economic challenges. I thought these were just normal human interactions, but I was actually engaging in collective creation of limitation. The journey toward authentic abundance requires a complete transformation of your verbal patterns. Instead of describing what's wrong, you begin affirming what's right in the spiritual realm. Instead of giving detailed accounts of your financial challenges, you start speaking only about divine provision and perfect solutions. This isn't about denying reality or pretending problems don't exist. This is about choosing to be a creative force for abundance rather than an unconscious participant in collective scarcity programming. But here's where the real work begins, and it's something that goes much deeper than simply changing your words. You have to consciously reprogram the inherited scarcity patterns that were downloaded into your consciousness long before you had any choice in the matter. These false beliefs about money, work, and worthiness weren't created by you, but they're operating through you every single day, creating financial experiences that reflect their limitations rather than your potential. The impact of this discovery was profound in my own transformation. I realized that I had been carrying around my grandmother's beliefs about money being scarce, my father's fears about financial security, my mother's guilt about wanting more than just enough. These weren't my original thoughts, but they had become so integrated into my consciousness that I was living them as if they were absolute truth. Every financial decision I made was being filtered through belief systems that were decades old and completely misaligned with spiritual abundance. Behind the scenes of your financial life, these inherited patterns are running like invisible software, determining what opportunities you notice, what possibilities you consider realistic, what level of prosperity you unconsciously believe you deserve. Most people never examine these background programs because they feel so familiar, so normal, so much like just the way things are. The practical work of replacing these false beliefs with spiritual truth becomes your daily practice of conscious creation. Every time you catch yourself thinking a thought that reflects limitation, you immediately replace it with an affirmation that reflects divine abundance. When your mind says money is hard to come by, you consciously affirm that divine supply flows effortlessly. When old patterns suggest you're not worthy of wealth, you declare your inheritance as a child of infinite source. This reprogramming process requires vigilance and commitment because these false beliefs have neural pathways that have been strengthened over years or even decades. But every time you choose truth over inherited limitation, every time you select a spiritual fact over a family pattern, you're literally rewiring your brain for abundance consciousness. Now, I want to reveal the specific technique that accelerated this reprogramming process for me and thousands of others, because there's a particular way of working with your subconscious mind that creates rapid transformation in your financial reality. Write in the comments, "I'm reprogramming now," if you're ready to replace those inherited limitations with spiritual truth. The specific technique that creates rapid transformation operates at the deepest level of your identity, and this is where most people miss the mark entirely. They focus on changing their words, their actions, even their thoughts, but they never address the fundamental self-concept that's actually driving their entire financial experience. The universe doesn't respond to your spoken desires or even your conscious intentions. It responds to the constant inner picture you hold of yourself, the identity you carry in the deepest chambers of your consciousness. This revelation completely transformed my understanding of why some people seem to effortlessly attract abundance, while others struggle despite knowing all the right principles. The difference isn't in their knowledge or their effort. The difference is in their self-concept. One person sees themselves as naturally prosperous, inherently blessed, divinely provided for. Another person, despite wanting wealth desperately, sees themselves as someone who has to struggle, someone who never quite has enough, someone for whom money is always a challenge. The hidden truth that changed everything for me was realizing that you cannot live above your self-image for any sustained period of time. You might temporarily force higher circumstances through willpower, determination, or even luck. You might land a better job, receive an unexpected windfall, or achieve a financial goal you've been working toward. But if your inner self-concept hasn't shifted to match that new level of prosperity, you'll unconsciously sabotage those circumstances to return to your inner mold. I've witnessed this pattern countless times, both in my own journey and in the lives of people around me. Someone receives a significant raise, but somehow their expenses increase to match it, leaving them feeling just as financially stressed as before. Another person inherits money or wins a prize, but within months they've spent it all and find themselves back in the same financial position they started from. This isn't bad luck or poor planning. This is the self-concept acting like a thermostat, automatically adjusting external circumstances to match internal identity. The impact of understanding this principle was staggering because it explained why all my previous attempts at financial improvement had been temporary. I was trying to change my circumstances without changing my self-concept. I was working on the effect without addressing the cause. I was painting over rust instead of treating the corrosion at its source. Behind the scenes of your financial life, your self-concept is operating like an invisible CEO, making executive decisions about what opportunities you notice, what risks you're willing to take, what level of success you unconsciously believe you can sustain. If you see yourself as someone who barely gets by, your self-concept will guide you toward decisions that maintain that identity. If you see yourself as someone who always struggles with money, your self-concept will find ways to create struggle, even in potentially abundant situations. The transformation begins when you realize that your self-concept isn't fixed or permanent. It's simply a mental habit that's been reinforced over time. Just like any other habit, it can be consciously changed through repetition and consistency. But here's the crucial part that most people miss. You can't change your self-concept by arguing with it logically or forcing it to accept new information. You have to feed it new experiences of who you're becoming, new internal evidence of your expanding identity. This process requires what I call identity rehearsal. Instead of waiting for external circumstances to prove that you're prosperous, you begin to think, feel, and make decisions from the consciousness of someone who already is prosperous. You ask yourself throughout the day, how would someone with abundant self-concept handle this situation? What would someone who knows they're divinely provided for choose in this moment? The journey of self-concept transformation happens gradually but consistently. Every time you choose thoughts that align with abundance rather than limitation, every time you make decisions from faith rather than fear, every time you respond to challenges from trust rather than panic, you're providing your self-concept with new evidence of who you really are. Now, I want to share with you the most powerful method for accelerating this self-concept shift, because there's a specific way of working with your subconscious identity that creates profound changes in your financial reality almost immediately. Write in the comments, "I am transforming my identity," if you're ready to shift your self-concept to match your divine inheritance. The most powerful method for accelerating this self-concept shift operates through what I call persistent prayer. But this isn't the kind of prayer most people think of. This isn't begging God for things or asking for external circumstances to change. This is the profound practice of recognizing who you are in God as spiritual reality, not as wishful thinking or hopeful imagination. This is about establishing your true identity in divine consciousness through consistent, deliberate spiritual alignment. The transformation that occurs through this practice goes far beyond positive thinking or mental exercises. When you persistently pray from the recognition of your divine inheritance, when you consistently affirm your oneness with infinite supply, when you repeatedly acknowledge your identity as a child of the Most High, you're not trying to convince God of anything. You're convincing your own consciousness to accept what has always been true about you in the spiritual realm. This revelation changed everything about my approach to financial transformation. I stopped asking God to give me things and started recognizing that everything was already given in divine mind. I stopped praying for abundance to come to me and started affirming that I was already one with abundance. I stopped seeking God's provision and started acknowledging that I was inseparable from the source of all provision. This shift from requesting to recognizing became the foundation of sustained prosperity. The hidden truth behind this practice is that your subconscious mind doesn't distinguish between spiritual reality and physical reality when something is consistently and persistently affirmed. When you repeatedly declare your divine inheritance, your subconscious begins to organize your entire life around that identity. It starts making decisions, noticing opportunities, and creating experiences that align with abundance consciousness rather than scarcity programming. But here's where the practice becomes even more transformative. The daily visualization component creates what I call identity anchoring. Every morning, before your mind gets caught up in the day's concerns, and every evening before your consciousness drifts into sleep, you plant the image of yourself living in complete harmony with good, without fear, without struggle, without lack. This isn't fantasy or escapism. This is providing your subconscious with a clear blueprint of your authentic spiritual identity. The impact of this morning and evening practice cannot be overstated. Your subconscious mind is most receptive to new programming during these twilight states of consciousness. When you consistently visualize yourself in unity with divine provision, making decisions from peace rather than panic, living with confidence rather than anxiety, receiving abundance rather than chasing it, you're literally rewiring your neural pathways for prosperity consciousness. Behind the scenes, something remarkable happens during these visualization sessions. Your nervous system begins to experience the feelings of abundance even before the external circumstances change. Your body starts to know what it feels like to be financially free, spiritually aligned, and divinely provided for. These felt experiences become the new normal for your consciousness, and your external world begins to reorganize itself to match this new internal climate. The journey of consistent visualization teaches you something profound about the nature of manifestation. You discover that you don't need to see external evidence before you can feel internal certainty. You learn that your consciousness can be prosperous regardless of your current circumstances. You realize that abundance is not a destination you arrive at, but a frequency you tune into. What happens during these daily sessions is that you're essentially rehearsing your new identity until it becomes more real to your subconscious than your old patterns of limitation. You're practicing prosperity consciousness until it becomes your natural way of being. You're training your mind to default to abundance rather than scarcity, to trust rather than worry, to expect good rather than brace for difficulty. Now, I want to explore with you the specific way this visualization practice creates what I call quantum shifts in your financial reality, because there's a particular mechanism through which these inner changes translate into outer transformations that defies conventional understanding. Write in the comments, "I see my true identity," if this recognition of who you are in God is becoming clear to you. The quantum shifts I'm talking about happen when you finally understand one of the most liberating truths in all of spiritual teaching. Your worthiness for abundance is not something you earn through achievement, it's something you recognize through divine sonship. This single revelation dissolves decades of programming that keeps people trapped in cycles of proving, striving, and trying to deserve what has already been given to them as their spiritual inheritance. The transformation that occurs when this truth penetrates your consciousness is immediate and profound. All the guilt about wanting more, all the shame about past financial mistakes, all the fear that you're somehow not qualified for prosperity simply evaporates. You realize that your worthiness isn't based on your track record, your education, your work, ethic, or even your spiritual development. It's based on the simple fact that you are a child of infinite source, and no child of a king lives in poverty. This recognition completely changes the decisions you make about money and opportunities. When you know you're worthy through divine inheritance rather than human accomplishment, you stop accepting less than what aligns with your true value. You stop undercharging for your services because you feel guilty about receiving. You stop settling for financial scraps because you believe that's all you deserve. You begin to expect abundance as your natural birthright, not as a reward for being good enough. Behind the scenes of this worthiness recognition, something remarkable happens in your nervous system. The chronic stress that comes from trying to prove yourself worthy begins to dissolve. The anxiety that stems from believing you must earn your good through perfect performance starts to release. Your entire being relaxes into the certainty that abundance is yours by divine right, not by human merit. But here's where the practice becomes even more transformative, and this is where most people miss the profound impact of their daily language patterns. Your words create your world with mathematical precision. They're not just sounds you make to communicate ideas or express emotions. They are spiritual forces that literally shape reality, invisible hammers that either build or destroy the structures of your experience. The hidden truth that revolutionized my entire financial journey was discovering that every word I spoke was either programming abundance or programming limitation into my future. When I said things like, "I can't afford it," I wasn't just describing my current situation, I was giving instructions to the universe about what to create next. When I declared money is tight, I wasn't simply reporting facts, I was actively tightening the flow of abundance in my life. The impact of understanding this principle cannot be overstated. Your words are not passive descriptions of reality, they are active creators of reality. Every time you speak, you are either invoking abundance or affirming lack, either opening channels or closing them, either aligning with divine flow or contradicting it. This means that changing your language patterns is not just about positive thinking, it's about conscious creation through spiritual law. The transformation begins when you realize that you have the power to choose words that align with your divine inheritance rather than words that reflect your current circumstances. Instead of saying, "I don't have enough," you can declare, "Divine supply is infinite." Instead of affirming, "Times are hard," you can proclaim, "God's provision is perfect." Instead of declaring, "I can't," you can acknowledge, "God can." This isn't about denying reality or pretending problems don't exist. This is about recognizing that your current reality was created by yesterday's words, and today's words are creating tomorrow's reality. When you consistently speak from abundance consciousness rather than scarcity programming, when you use language that affirms divine provision rather than human limitation, you're literally instructing the universe to reorganize itself around prosperity instead of lack. The journey of conscious language creation teaches you that you are not a victim of circumstances. You are a creator through consciousness. Every word becomes a deliberate choice. Every phrase becomes an intentional declaration. Every conversation becomes an opportunity to affirm the spiritual truth of infinite abundance. Now, I want to reveal the specific way this conscious language practice amplifies the power of your visualization and prayer work, because there's a synergistic effect that occurs when these spiritual practices work together that creates exponential transformation. Write in the comments, "My words create abundance," if you're ready to speak only from your divine inheritance. The synergistic effect I'm talking about creates what I call a spiritual feedback loop that accelerates manifestation beyond anything you've experienced before. When your visualization work, your prayer practice, and your conscious language patterns all align around the same spiritual truth, they don't just add together, they multiply each other's power. But here's the revelation that took my transformation to an entirely new level. You see what you speak, not speak what you see. This principle completely inverts how most people think reality works. The world teaches us to observe conditions first, then describe what we observe. But spiritual law operates in reverse. Your words actually create the conditions you will observe. Your descriptions become your destinations. Your declarations determine your experiences. Conditions follow words, as shadows follow bodies, meaning your external circumstances are always trailing behind your internal declarations. Hidden truth behind this principle is that your subconscious mind uses your words as blueprints for creating your reality. When you consistently speak abundance, your subconscious begins constructing abundant experiences. When you habitually declare prosperity, your subconscious starts organizing prosperity into your life. But when you repeatedly describe limitation, lack, or struggle, your subconscious faithfully creates more situations that match those descriptions. This transformation in understanding changed every conversation I had, every phone call I made, every casual comment I spoke. I realized that I had been unknowingly programming my own financial struggles through careless language patterns. Every time I said, "Money doesn't grow on trees," or "Times are tough," or "I can barely make ends meet," I was giving my subconscious precise instructions about what kind of financial reality to construct. The journey toward conscious speech requires what I call a complete cleansing of your verbal patterns. You must eliminate every complaint, every curse, every negative declaration about money, circumstances, or possibilities. This doesn't mean you become unrealistic or ignore genuine challenges. It means you refuse to speak of evil, scarcity, or limitation, even when circumstances appear difficult, because you understand that your words are creating tomorrow's circumstances. Behind the scenes of this speech cleansing process, something remarkable happens in your consciousness. You begin to realize how often you had been unconsciously sabotaging your own prayers and visualizations through contradictory language. You would spend time in morning meditation affirming abundance, then spend the day describing limitation. You would visualize prosperity in your quiet moments, then speak poverty in your conversations with others. The impact of maintaining verbal integrity between your spiritual practices and your daily speech creates what I call coherent creation. Instead of sending mixed signals to the universe, instead of affirming abundance privately while declaring lack publicly, you begin speaking only from your highest spiritual understanding, regardless of what circumstances currently appear to be telling you. This practice requires tremendous discipline at first because it goes against every social norm and conversational habit you've developed. When friends want to complain about the economy, you must find ways to redirect toward possibility. When family members engage in lack consciousness discussions, you must either shift the conversation or remove yourself from it. When colleagues bond over financial stress, you must choose not to participate in collective limitation programming. The transformation that occurs through this verbal discipline is profound. You discover that refusing to speak limitation doesn't make you naive or unrealistic. It makes you a conscious creator who understands that today's words become tomorrow's world. You realize that declining to participate in scarcity conversations doesn't make you antisocial. It makes you a person of integrity who refuses to contradict their spiritual convictions through careless speech. What happens as you maintain this verbal cleansing is that your entire mental atmosphere begins to shift. The thoughts that arise in your mind start to align with the words you're allowing yourself to speak. Your emotional patterns begin to match your conscious declarations. Your decision-making process becomes guided by abundance consciousness rather than limitation programming. Now, I want to explore with you the final piece of this transformation puzzle, because there's one more spiritual law that ties all of these practices together and creates what I call the abundance breakthrough that changes everything permanently. Write in the comments, "I speak only abundance," if you're committed to cleansing your speech of all limitation language. The abundance breakthrough I'm talking about happens when you elevate your language practice from casual positive thinking to sacred declaration through divine affirmations. These aren't just feel-good phrases or motivational mantras. They are spiritual tools of creation that, when spoken with genuine reverence, literally reprogram your cellular consciousness. When you declare, "I am one with the riches of God," with the same depth of conviction that you would speak a prayer, something profound shifts in your entire being. The transformation that occurs through this practice goes far beyond mental reprogramming. You're not just changing your thoughts, you're changing your vibrational frequency at a molecular level. Each time you speak these sacred affirmations with true reverence, allowing the words to resonate through your entire body until they vibrate in your cells, you're establishing a new energetic foundation for abundance to manifest through you. This revelation changed my entire approach to spiritual practice. I stopped treating affirmations as something I did mechanically while multitasking, and I began engaging with them as sacred communion with divine truth. I would speak each phrase slowly, deliberately, feeling the meaning penetrate deeper than my mind into the very essence of my being. "I am one with the riches of God" became not just a statement I repeated, but a truth I embodied. Behind the scenes of this practice, something remarkable happens in your nervous system. The reverent repetition of these divine truths begins to override years of programming that told you abundance was separate from you, that prosperity was something you had to chase or earn. Instead, your entire being starts to recognize abundance as your natural inheritance, as inseparable from your divine identity. But here's where the practice becomes even more transformative, and this is something that took me years to fully understand. The way you respond to other people's abundance becomes a direct reflection of your own abundance consciousness. When you bless others' prosperity, when you genuinely celebrate their financial success, when you feel joy rather than envy at their good fortune, you're actually activating your own abundance channels. The hidden truth that revolutionized my relationship with wealth was discovering that cursing wealth in others, even silently, was rejecting my own prosperity. Every time I felt resentment towards someone's success, every time I criticized their abundance, every time I harbored jealousy about their financial freedom, I was essentially telling the universe that I didn't want prosperity to flow in my direction either. This transformation required a complete overhaul of my emotional responses to other people's good fortune. I had to release years of conditioning that taught me to view wealth as a limited resource, that made me believe someone else's abundance somehow diminished my own possibilities. I had to reprogram my automatic reactions from competition to celebration, from envy to inspiration. The impact of this shift was immediate and profound. When I began genuinely blessing others' financial success, when I started using their prosperity as evidence that abundance was available to everyone, including me, my own channels opened in ways I had never experienced before. It was as if my celebration of their good fortune was creating space for my own blessings to manifest. The journey of blessing others. Abundance teaches you something profound about the nature of prosperity consciousness. You discover that abundance is not a finite pie where someone else's slice makes yours smaller. You realize that prosperity is an infinite flow that expands when more people participate in it. You understand that celebrating others' wealth actually magnetizes wealth toward you. What happens during this practice is that you begin to see abundant people as proof that the spiritual laws are working, rather than as threats to your own financial security. Their success becomes evidence that divine supply is real and available. Their prosperity becomes inspiration for your own possibilities, rather than reason for resentment or self-doubt. Now, I want to share with you the culminating principle that ties all of these spiritual laws together into what I call the prosperity protocol, because there's a specific sequence and rhythm to applying these practices that creates exponential, rather than just additive, results. Write in the comments, "I bless all abundance," if you're ready to celebrate others' prosperity as evidence of what's possible for you too. The prosperity protocol I'm revealing operates on a fundamental spiritual principle that most people completely overlook in their pursuit of abundance. You cannot fill a cup that's already full with outdated beliefs, inherited limitations, and accumulated mental clutter. Before the universe can pour new levels of prosperity into your life, you must create space by consciously releasing the old patterns that have been occupying that space for years, sometimes decades. This revelation transformed my entire approach to abundance work because I realized I had been trying to add prosperity consciousness on top of scarcity programming, attempting to build abundance on a foundation of limitation. It's like trying to plant a garden in soil that's already choked with weeds. The new seeds of abundance consciousness cannot take root when your mental and emotional landscape is still crowded with fear, doubt, and inherited beliefs about money being scarce or difficult to obtain. The transformation begins with understanding that clearing space isn't just a mental exercise. It's a holistic process that must happen on multiple levels simultaneously. Your physical environment, your emotional patterns, your mental habits, and your spiritual practices all need to be aligned and decluttered for maximum abundance flow. When any one of these areas remains cluttered with old energy, it creates resistance that slows down or blocks your manifestation process entirely. The hidden truth that changed everything for me was discovering that disorder in my environment was directly reflecting disorder in my consciousness. The cluttered closets, the disorganized papers, the accumulated possessions I no longer used or loved were all external manifestations of internal chaos. Every item I kept out of fear that I might need it someday was a physical representation of scarcity thinking. Every drawer, stuffed with random objects, was mirroring the mental confusion that was blocking clear abundance channels. Behind the scenes of this clearing process, something remarkable happens that goes far beyond just having a tidy space. As you release physical clutter, you're sending a powerful message to your subconscious that you trust new good to come. You're declaring through your actions that you don't need to hoard or hold on to things out of fear. You're creating energetic space that literally calls forth new abundance to fill the void you've consciously created. But the physical clearing is just the beginning of this transformation. The emotional clutter that accumulates over years of financial stress, disappointment, and struggle creates even more resistance to abundance flow than physical disorder. Old resentments about money, lingering guilt about past financial mistakes, accumulated fears about not having enough. These emotional patterns take up enormous space in your consciousness and leave no room for prosperity to establish itself. The journey of emotional clearing requires what I call radical forgiveness, not just of others, but of yourself. You must release every grudge you've held against people who you felt had more than you deserved. You must forgive yourself for every financial decision you regret. You must let go of every story about why abundance has been difficult for you in the past. This emotional space clearing creates an immediate shift in your energetic frequency that abundance can actually penetrate. The impact of this comprehensive clearing process extends into the mental and spiritual dimensions as well. The repetitive thoughts that loop through your mind all day, the inherited beliefs about money and worthiness that you've never questioned, the spiritual practices that feel obligatory rather than inspired. All of these need to be examined and cleared to make room for fresh, abundance consciousness to take root. What happens during this clearing process is that you begin to feel lighter, more spacious, more available for good to flow through you. You discover that you had been unconsciously resisting abundance, not because you didn't want it, but because there simply wasn't room in your life for it to land. The clutter in every dimension of your existence had been creating a vibrational static that was interfering with clear reception of divine supply. Now, I want to explore with you the specific methodology for this comprehensive clearing process, because there's a particular sequence and approach that creates maximum effectiveness while avoiding the emotional overwhelm that causes most people to abandon the process before completion. Write in the comments, "I'm creating space now," if you're ready to clear out everything that's been blocking your abundance channels. The specific methodology for maximum effectiveness begins with understanding that surrender is not resignation or giving up on your desires. True spiritual surrender is actually the deepest form of trust, where you place your heartfelt desires in God's hands while accepting His perfect development of them. This isn't passive waiting or abandoning your goals. This is active collaboration with divine intelligence that knows how to unfold your abundance in ways that exceed anything your limited human perspective could have designed. The transformation that occurs through authentic surrender dissolves the frantic energy that actually repels abundance. When you're desperately trying to control every detail of how your prosperity should manifest, when you're constantly monitoring and manipulating circumstances, when you're forcing outcomes through willpower alone, you create a vibrational resistance that blocks the very flow you're trying to activate. But when you surrender your desires to divine wisdom while maintaining clear intention, something miraculous happens behind the scenes. This revelation completely changed my relationship with manifestation because I realized I had been exhausting myself trying to micromanage the universe. I was holding my desires so tightly with such specific expectations about timing and form that I was actually strangling the life out of them. The moment I learned to hold my vision clearly while releasing attachment to exactly how it would unfold, abundance began flowing in ways that were far better than anything I had originally imagined. Behind the scenes of this surrender process, your nervous system begins to relax out of chronic fight-or-flight mode. The constant stress of trying to control outcomes dissolves, and you enter a state of peaceful expectancy that becomes magnetic to good. Divine intelligence can finally work through you instead of against your resistance, orchestrating synchronicities and opportunities that your limited human planning could never have arranged. But here's where the clearing process becomes even more profound, and this is something that took me years to fully understand. Forgiveness is not just a nice spiritual practice, it's the most powerful method for emptying the soul of the poison that blocks abundance. Every resentment you carry, every grudge you harbor, every bitter memory you replay is taking up valuable real estate in your consciousness that could be occupied by prosperity energy instead. The hidden truth about forgiveness that revolutionized my financial life was discovering that I wasn't forgiving others for their benefit, I was forgiving them for mine. When I held on to anger about past financial betrayals, when I nursed resentment about people who had more money than I thought they deserved, when I carried bitterness about opportunities that didn't work out the way I expected, I was literally poisoning my own abundance channels. The impact of deep forgiveness work cannot be overstated because it creates immediate energetic shifts that abundance can flow through. Every person you set free through forgiveness creates more space in your heart for love, gratitude, and trust. Every old wound you release through conscious forgiveness clears another channel for divine supply to move through your life. This isn't about condoning bad behavior or pretending harm didn't occur. This is about refusing to let past experiences contaminate your present abundance. The journey of forgiveness becomes a daily practice of scanning your consciousness for any trace of resentment, bitterness, or blame that might be occupying space that could be filled with prosperity energy instead. Sometimes the forgiveness needs to be directed towards specific people who hurt you financially. Sometimes it needs to be extended to yourself for past mistakes and poor decisions. Sometimes it needs to flow toward God for allowing circumstances that challenged your faith. What happens during this forgiveness clearing is that you begin to feel a lightness and freedom that you may not have experienced in years. The emotional baggage that was weighing down your abundance frequency starts to lift. The mental loops that kept replaying old injustices begin to quiet. The spiritual static that was interfering with clear divine communication starts to clear. Now I want to reveal the final component of this clearing process that ties everything together, because there's one more dimension of space creation that most people never address, and it's often the missing piece that prevents the full abundance breakthrough from occurring. Write in the comments, "I forgive and release," if you're ready to empty your soul of everything that's been blocking your prosperity. The final component that prevents the full abundance breakthrough from occurring is something so fundamental, yet so overlooked in our noise-saturated world that most people never even consider it. You must make silence for divine instruction, because God cannot speak into a mind that's crowded with constant noise, control mechanisms, and fear-based thinking. The missing piece for so many people is that they're trying to receive spiritual guidance while their consciousness is completely cluttered with mental chatter, media consumption, and endless internal commentary. This revelation transformed my entire spiritual practice when I realized I had been praying to God for answers while never actually creating space to hear the responses. I was asking for divine guidance about my financial decisions, but then immediately filling my mind with analysis, worry, and human reasoning that drowned out any subtle spiritual instruction that might have been trying to reach me. The silence I'm talking about isn't just the absence of external noise, it's the conscious emptying of internal mental activity. The transformation that occurs when you create this sacred silence is immediate and profound. In the quiet space beyond your thoughts, beyond your fears, beyond your need to control and figure everything out. Divine intelligence can finally communicate with you. The guidance that's always been available but couldn't penetrate your mental static begins to flow through as intuitive knowing, inspired ideas, and sudden clarity about decisions that once seemed impossible to make. Behind the scenes of this silence practice, something remarkable happens in your relationship with abundance. You stop trying to force outcomes through mental effort alone, and you begin to receive instruction about divinely aligned action. Instead of pushing and striving from human limitation, you start moving from spiritual guidance that knows the perfect timing, the right opportunities, and the most effective pathways for your prosperity to unfold. But here's where the abundance process becomes truly transformative, and this is the key that unlocks sustained prosperity rather than temporary financial improvements. You must discover how to serve with joy in order to become a clear channel for divine energy, because wealth flows where spirit can circulate freely through willing vessels. This isn't about self-sacrifice or depleting yourself for others. This is about finding the unique way your gifts and talents can bless the world while simultaneously magnetizing abundance back to you. The hidden truth that revolutionized my financial reality was understanding that abundance doesn't come to those who desperately need it. Abundance comes to those who joyfully serve as channels for it. When you discover your natural way of contributing value, when you find the intersection between what you love to do and what the world needs, when you serve others from genuine enthusiasm rather than obligation, you become irresistible to prosperity. The impact of this shift from needing abundance to channeling abundance cannot be overstated. Your entire energetic frequency changes when you stop being someone who's trying to get something and start being someone who's giving something valuable. The desperate energy that repels money dissolves, and you begin to operate from the attractive frequency of someone who knows they have something worthwhile to offer. The journey of discovering your joyful service usually involves releasing the programming that told you work had to be difficult, that money came only through struggle, that you had to choose between doing what you loved and making a living. When you find your authentic way of serving, work stops feeling like work because you're expressing your natural gifts rather than forcing yourself into roles that drain your energy. What happens during this transformation is that opportunities begin appearing that perfectly match your natural abilities and enthusiasms. People start seeking you out because they can feel the authentic joy you bring to your service. Money begins flowing more easily because you're no longer swimming against the current of your own nature. You're moving with the divine flow that wants to express itself through your unique gifts. Now, I want to reveal the specific way all of these spiritual principles integrate into what I call the daily abundance protocol, because there's a particular rhythm and sequence to practicing these laws that creates exponential results rather than just incremental improvements. Write in the comments, "I serve with joy," if you're ready to become a willing channel for divine abundance to flow through you. The daily abundance protocol I'm revealing operates on a profound spiritual truth that completely reframes how you approach prosperity. Instead of asking, "How can I make more money?" which comes from a consciousness of lack and desperation, you begin asking, "How can I be more useful?" which comes from a consciousness of abundance and service. This single shift in your fundamental question changes everything about how opportunities appear in your life and how money flows to you. The transformation that occurs through this reframing is immediate because usefulness precedes abundance in the spiritual order of manifestation. When you focus on how you can contribute more value, solve more problems, and serve more people, abundance becomes the natural byproduct of your increased usefulness rather than something you have to chase or struggle to obtain. Money starts flowing to you because you've become a magnet for it through the value you're providing. This revelation changed my entire approach to financial growth when, I realized I'd been trying to extract money from the world instead of adding value to it. I was focused on what I could get rather than what I could give. I was thinking about my needs instead of others' needs. The moment I shifted to asking how I could be more useful, how I could serve at a higher level, how I could contribute something meaningful, everything began to change. Behind the scenes of this shift, something remarkable happens in how opportunities present themselves to you. Instead of constantly searching for ways to make money, people start seeking you out because they can sense that you have something valuable to offer. Instead of competing for scarce resources, you begin creating abundance through the unique value you provide. Instead of worrying about financial security, you start building it through your increasing usefulness. But here's the hidden truth that makes this approach so powerful. God doesn't create the useless. Every person who comes into this world has been given natural gifts, talents, and capacities that are meant to serve a purpose in the grand design of creation. Your abundance breakthrough happens when you discover what those gifts are and begin using them consciously to serve others. Your financial struggle ends when you stop trying to force yourself into roles that don't align with your natural abilities. The journey of discovering your natural gifts often requires looking beyond what you've been trained to do professionally and connecting with what you naturally love to do, what energizes you, what feels effortless when you're doing it. These gifts might be obvious talents like creativity, communication, or problem-solving. They might be subtler qualities like bringing peace to chaotic situations, helping people feel understood, or seeing solutions that others miss. The impact of aligning your service with your natural gifts creates what I call effortless abundance. When you're operating from your authentic strengths, work stops feeling like work because you're expressing your true nature rather than forcing yourself into someone else's mold. Money begins flowing more easily because you're not swimming upstream against your own gifts. You're flowing downstream with the current of your divine design. What happens during this alignment process is that you begin to attract opportunities that perfectly match your natural abilities. People start noticing the unique value you bring because you're operating from authenticity rather than trying to be something you're not. Your services become more valuable because they're emerging from your genuine strengths rather than learned skills that drain your energy. The transformation deepens when you realize that your natural gifts aren't random accidents or mere personality traits. They're divine assignments, spiritual tools that you've been given to fulfill a specific purpose in the world. When you start using these gifts consciously to serve others, when you begin seeing them as sacred instruments for blessing the world, abundance becomes inevitable because you're cooperating with your divine design. Write in the comments, "I know my gifts matter," if you're beginning to recognize the divine purpose behind your natural abilities. The specific methodology for identifying and developing your natural gifts into abundance-generating services begins with understanding a crucial distinction that most people miss entirely. Inspired service energizes rather than drains, because when you're serving from love rather than obligation, when you're expressing your authentic gifts rather than forcing yourself into roles that deplete you, the universe itself begins to support your efforts in ways that seem almost magical. This transformation in how service feels reveals one of the most important secrets about sustainable abundance. When you're operating from your natural gifts in service to others, you don't end each day exhausted and depleted. Instead, you feel energized, fulfilled, and eager to continue, because you're flowing with your divine design rather than working against it. The universe recognizes authentic service and responds by opening doors, providing resources, and arranging synchronicities that support your mission. The hidden truth that revolutionized my understanding of service was discovering that when I was serving from obligation, guilt, or the need to prove myself worthy, I would burn out quickly and resentment would build up. but when I was serving from genuine love, from the joy of expressing my gifts, from the natural desire to contribute something meaningful, energy would flow to me rather than from me. I would end days of intense service feeling more alive and inspired than when I started. Behind the scenes of this energetic difference, something profound is happening in your relationship with divine intelligence. When you serve from authentic love and natural gifts, you become a collaborative partner with universal forces rather than someone swimming against the current. Resources appear when you need them. The right people show up at the perfect time. Opportunities unfold that you never could have planned or orchestrated through human effort alone. But here's where many spiritually minded people derail their abundance journey, and it's something I learned through painful experience. Divine service doesn't require self-destruction or martyrdom. Setting healthy boundaries while giving is not only acceptable, it's essential for sustainable service and continued abundance flow. The old programming that says you must sacrifice yourself completely for others actually contradicts spiritual law and eventually leads to burnout, resentment, and financial struggle. The revelation that changed my entire approach to service was understanding that boundaries aren't barriers to love. They're containers that allow love to flow more effectively. When you give beyond your capacity, when you say yes to every request, regardless of your own well-being, when you allow others to drain your energy without replenishment, you're not serving from divine love. You're serving from ego-driven people-pleasing or guilt-based obligation. The transformation that occurs when you learn to serve with boundaries is immediate and profound. You stop attracting people who want to take advantage of your generosity. You begin drawing those who genuinely value what you offer and are willing to exchange fair energy for it. Your service becomes more powerful because it's coming from a full cup rather than an empty one. Your abundance increases because you're honoring the divine vessel through which the service flows. The journey of implementing healthy boundaries in service requires releasing the false belief that spiritual people must give everything away, that charging for your gifts somehow makes them less sacred, that taking care of yourself is selfish. These are distortions that actually prevent you from serving at your highest capacity. When you honor your own needs, maintain your energy, and create sustainable practices, you can serve more people more effectively over the long term. What happens during this boundary-setting process is that your service becomes more valuable, not less. People begin to respect what you offer because you demonstrate that it has worth through how you treat it. Your abundance flows more consistently because you're creating sustainable systems rather than boom and bust cycles of giving and depletion. Now I want to reveal the specific framework that integrates all of these principles into what I call the abundance acceleration method, because there's a particular way of combining inspired service with healthy boundaries that creates exponential rather than linear growth in both impact and income. Write in the comments, "I serve with boundaries," if you're ready to honor both your gifts and your well-being as sacred. The abundance acceleration method I'm revealing operates on one of the most misunderstood principles in all of spiritual teaching. Most people think gratitude is social politeness, a nice way to acknowledge when something good happens to you. But from a spiritual perspective, gratitude is actually a generative force that activates manifestation. It's creative spiritual energy that literally calls forth more of what you're appreciating. When you understand gratitude as a tool of creation rather than just a response to blessing, everything changes about how quickly abundance manifests in your life. This transformation in understanding completely revolutionized my relationship with both gratitude and abundance, because I realized I had been using gratitude backwards. I was waiting for good things to happen so I could feel grateful, instead of using gratitude to generate the good things I wanted to experience. The hidden truth is that gratitude doesn't follow manifestation. Gratitude precedes it. When you give thanks before receiving, You're declaring to the universe that you've already received in spirit, and this is the exact frequency where creation operates. The revelation behind this practice defies everything the logical mind believes about how reality works. Your rational thoughts tell you to see first, then believe. But spiritual law operates in reverse. You must give thanks first, then you see the manifestation. When you express genuine gratitude for abundance that hasn't yet appeared, physically, you're aligning your consciousness with the spiritual realm where all things already exist in their perfect form. Behind the scenes of this pre-gratitude practice, something remarkable happens in your vibrational frequency. Instead of operating from the energy of need, want, or lack, you shift into the energy of having, receiving, and completion. Your entire being begins to vibrate at the frequency of someone who already possesses what they desire, and the universe can only respond by matching that frequency with corresponding physical experiences. The impact of this shift was immediate and profound in my own journey. Instead of spending my days focused on what I didn't have, worrying about what wasn't working, or feeling anxious about uncertain outcomes, I began each morning giving thanks for divine provision that was already mine in the spiritual realm. I would thank God for opportunities that were on their way, for resources that were aligning, for solutions that were already perfect in divine mind. The transformation that occurs through this practice goes far beyond positive thinking or wishful hoping. When you give genuine thanks for what you haven't yet received physically, you're making a declaration of faith that demonstrates absolute trust in spiritual law. You're saying to the universe, I know this is already done, and I don't need physical proof before I acknowledge it. This level of faith becomes magnetic to manifestation because doubt is the only thing that delays divine supply. The journey of pre-gratitude requires releasing the need for external validation before you express internal appreciation. Most people wait for their bank account to increase before they feel grateful for abundance. They wait for the perfect opportunity to appear before they thank God for divine timing. They wait for problems to be solved before they appreciate divine wisdom. But spiritual law works in the opposite direction. Your gratitude creates the conditions for these blessings to manifest. What happens during this practice is that you begin to live in a constant state of appreciation for good that's always flowing, always available, always seeking expression through your life. Instead of gratitude being an occasional response to special circumstances, it becomes your natural way of being. You start to feel grateful, not because of what you have, but because of who you are in relationship to infinite source. The abundance acceleration occurs when this gratitude practice combines with your inspired service and healthy boundaries to create what I call a prosperity vortex. Your appreciation for divine supply magnetizes more supply. Your joyful service creates more opportunities for abundance to flow through you. Your healthy boundaries ensure that the abundance you generate gets to stay and compound rather than being depleted. Now, I want to share with you the final component that makes this entire system unstoppable, because there's one more spiritual principle that ties all of these practices together into what I call the divine abundance lifestyle. Write in the comments, I give thanks now, if you're ready to start expressing gratitude for abundance that's already yours in spirit. The divine abundance lifestyle that makes this entire system unstoppable operates through a profound understanding of how consciousness literally creates channels for prosperity to flow. Grateful consciousness opens these channels, while complaining consciousness closes them. And this isn't just a nice metaphor, it's a precise spiritual law that operates with mathematical certainty. Every time you express genuine appreciation, you're creating an energetic pathway for more good to reach you. Every time you complain or focus on what's wrong, you're literally shutting down the very channels through which your abundance wants to flow. This revelation transformed my entire approach to daily life when I realized that my consciousness was either opening or closing abundance channels every single moment. During challenging periods, when circumstances seemed difficult or uncertain, I had been unconsciously closing my own channels by focusing on problems, expressing frustration, and complaining about delays. But when I learned to maintain grateful consciousness, even during apparent setbacks, those same challenging periods became times of accelerated growth and breakthrough. The hidden truth behind this principle is that gratitude turns waiting into gestation. When you're complaining about how long something is taking, when you're frustrated that your abundance hasn't arrived yet, when you're impatient with divine timing, you're actually interrupting the very process you want to accelerate. But when you maintain grateful consciousness during periods of apparent delay, you transform that waiting time into gestation time, where invisible spiritual forces are working behind the scenes to prepare the perfect manifestation. Behind the scenes of this gratitude practice, something remarkable happens in your neural pathways and emotional patterns. Daily gratitude literally reprograms your mind toward abundance by training your attention to notice good rather than lack, possibility rather than problems, evidence of divine provision rather than proof of limitation. This isn't just positive thinking, it's consciousness training that reshapes how you perceive and interact with reality. The transformation accelerates when you implement what I call comprehensive gratitude, which includes appreciation for past blessings that brought you to this moment, present good that you might be taking for granted, and future abundance that's already perfect in divine mind. This three-dimensional gratitude practice creates a continuous flow of appreciation that keeps your abundance channels permanently open rather than just occasionally activated. The impact of writing daily gratitude became a cornerstone of my abundance practice because it forced me to actively search for evidence of divine provision rather than passively noticing problems. Each morning, I would write appreciation for lessons learned from past challenges, for current blessings both obvious and subtle, and for future manifestations that I knew were already complete in the spiritual realm. This practice gradually shifted my default mental patterns from scarcity scanning to abundance recognition. The journey of comprehensive gratitude reveals how much good has always been flowing in your life that you simply weren't trained to notice. You begin to see that what you once labeled as setbacks were actually setups for greater good. You recognize that current challenges are pregnant with possibilities you hadn't considered. You start to feel the presence of future blessings that are gestating in the invisible realm, waiting for the perfect moment to emerge. What happens during this daily gratitude writing is that you're literally rewiring your brain to default to appreciation rather than complaint, to trust rather than worry, to expect good rather than brace for disappointment. Your consciousness becomes a magnet for abundance because you're consistently focusing on and acknowledging the flow of divine provision rather than the appearance of temporary lack. Now, I want to explore with you how this comprehensive gratitude practice becomes the foundation for what I call living in the abundance flow, because there's a specific way this daily practice evolves into a permanent state of consciousness that makes prosperity inevitable. Write in the comments, "Gratitude opens my channels," if you can feel how appreciation is already shifting your consciousness toward abundance. Living in the abundance flow reaches its highest expression when you learn to thank even for challenges as opportunities to strengthen faith and open doors of wisdom. This is perhaps the most advanced spiritual practice because it requires you to see with divine eyes rather than human perception, to recognize that what appears as obstacles are actually invitations to deeper trust and expanded consciousness. The transformation that occurs when you begin blessing your difficulties instead of cursing them is immediate and profound. Every challenge becomes a classroom rather than a punishment. Every setback becomes a setup for greater breakthrough. Every apparent delay becomes divine preparation for something beyond what you originally imagined. This shift In perspective doesn't just change how you feel about problems, it literally changes how problems function in your life. Behind the scenes of this practice, something remarkable happens in your relationship with spiritual law. When you can genuinely thank God for challenges while they're happening, when you can maintain faith and gratitude in the midst of apparent difficulty, you demonstrate a level of trust that activates forces most people never access. Divine intelligence begins working through your challenges to create solutions, opportunities, and revelations that wouldn't have been possible without the catalyst of that difficulty. The hidden truth I discovered through my own journey of blessing challenges was that resistance to problems actually prolongs them, while gratitude for problems transforms them. When I stopped fighting against financial obstacles and started thanking God for the wisdom they were bringing, when I stopped seeing setbacks as evidence that the spiritual laws weren't working and started recognizing them as divine course corrections, everything shifted. The challenges didn't necessarily disappear immediately, but they began serving my highest good rather than creating suffering. The impact of this practice extends far beyond just feeling better about difficult circumstances. When you can maintain grateful consciousness during challenges, you become unshakable in your abundance faith. You develop what I call spiritual resilience that makes you magnetic to breakthrough solutions and miracle manifestations. Now, I want to reveal the ultimate integration of all these spiritual laws into what I call the Master Abundance Protocol, because there's a specific way all of these practices work together to create the kind of sustained prosperity that becomes your new normal. Write in the comments, "I bless my challenges," if you're ready to see every difficulty as a divine opportunity for growth and wisdom. The Master Abundance Protocol that integrates all of these spiritual laws into sustained prosperity isn't just about implementing individual practices. It's about living from a completely transformed consciousness where abundance becomes as natural as breathing, where prosperity flows not because you're forcing it, but because you've aligned every aspect of your being with divine supply. What we've explored together today represents decades of spiritual discovery, personal transformation, and practical application of laws that most people never learn exist. If you've stayed with me through this entire journey, if you've felt the truth resonating in your soul as we've uncovered these principles together, then you're part of a rare group of individuals who understand that real wealth comes from spiritual alignment, not material accumulation. The fact that you're here right now, having absorbed these teachings, tells me something profound about your spiritual readiness. You're not just someone looking for quick financial fixes. You're someone who recognizes that true abundance requires inner transformation, consciousness shifts, and alignment with divine principles that operate beyond the visible world. This kind of content, these deep spiritual revelations about wealth and abundance, they're exactly what I'm committed to sharing with people who are ready to live from a higher frequency. If these teachings have touched your heart, if they've sparked something within you that knows there's more available than what the world has told you is possible, then I invite you to subscribe to this channel. You'll be joining a community of souls who understand that prosperity is a spiritual practice, not just a financial strategy. And if you made it all the way to this moment with me, if you've journeyed through every principle and felt the transformation beginning to stir within your consciousness, leave a comment saying, "This message was meant for me." I want to know that these teachings found their way to someone who will actually use them to create the abundant life they're designed to live. The like button might seem like a small thing, but when you click it, you're telling me that this connection we've created matters, that these spiritual truths about abundance deserve to reach more people who are ready to receive them. There's a video right here that takes these principles even deeper into practical application. Click and continue with me over there, because your abundance journey is just beginning, and I have so much more to share with you.